So I want to talk about why I deconstructed or left Christianity. I think it's a good place to start. So throughout my Christian life, I've always had this sort of, well, it's kind of a coming and going of doubt, you know? Sometimes it kind of flares up, you know? And that's kind of been true. And that's a fairly common experience for Christians, which is a good thing. It's good to reassess your beliefs as new information comes in. That's kind of the basis for critical thinking. So I had made a decision that I wanted to face this doubt head on, you know, once and for all. I believed that God was all-powerful, all-knowing, and so he would be able to see my doubt and he would know how to remove it. He would know what it would take to put doubt to rest, you know, so that throughout my life I could always, you know, if I had some sort of experience with him that was very real, I could always look back on it, so that any time this doubt would flare up again, I could look back on this point in time in my life when God made himself real to me, and that would quash any doubt that I was experiencing at the time. So that's what I wanted, and that's what I prayed for. And about 2 weeks later, I was hit by a car. I was biking to school, and an SUV, I had a green light and an SUV plowed through the intersection. I went up on the hood and down on the street. Ended up in the hospital. I was alright. I had a concussion, but I was fairly okay. But I was in the waiting room, or I was in the emergency room, and it was a pretty big emergency room. I mean, I was in a solo room. I was in a one occupant, a room with one occupancy or something. I don't know. It was one bed. And I remember laying there, and I was living in Portland, Oregon. My family was on the East Coast, and I was sort of alone. And I remember laying in that emergency room bed and feeling completely alone, completely abandoned. Like there was no one. I was left alone in that room for a bit, and that's when this sort of sunk in. I was laying there in bed, and I just had an experience of being completely alone. That, you know, there was no comfort from God or the Spirit or anything. No Bible verses popped in my head. Nothing. I was just, I don't know if it was for the first time, but I was just completely by myself, isolated. There were no nurses in the room or anything like that. They left me alone. And that made me cry. Now, I understand. I mean, I had a concussion at the time, but I was still aware. I wasn't like completely blacked out or anything like that. And so it seemed almost like that was an answer to my prayer, where I asked God to make himself real to me, to remove all doubt. And instead, what I got 2 weeks later was this sense of him not being there, which isn't something I really felt before. I mean, I've felt alone, but like in my mind, there was always this idea that God was there and he was watching over me and he was going to take care of me. And I think that's the power of religion. In these dark times when we're totally isolated and we're alone and we're afraid and hurt and scared and we need someone to help us. You know, sometimes believing in this idea that there's a God there, it can be really comforting. It can be that thing that gets you back up onto your feet and moving forward again. And that is a powerful thing, but it's, in my opinion, religion, at least the Christian religion, which is the one I will be referring to, because it's the one I know deeply. My father was a pastor, and I grew up in a Christian home with mom, two brother and a sister. And we were part of the Christian Missionary Alliance, which is a denomination that I think is it's based out of Nyack, New York. And so it's more of a New England sort of Northeast kind of thing, I think, but it's all over the world as well. It's not like it's not a denomination that you hear about a lot because it's pretty stable and fairly innocuous, benign. I became a Christian when I was 4 years old. That's when I prayed to God and invited Jesus into my heart. And so I grew up in the church. We moved about every 6 to 8 years to a new place, a new church. There was no reason. Like we were never forced out. We were never. My father was a very good pastor, and that he performed his role well from a very general perspective. So we were never forced out or anything. So I got to integrate into a lot of different communities, different types of people, from Connecticut to Pennsylvania, and in different areas of the country, different states and stuff. Church means different things to different people, and I got to experience that. It was really good to have new friends and stuff. And some places were better than others, but I always carried my faith with me. I was a worship leader. I led a couple of small groups. I was part of youth groups growing up and everything like that. And I was devoted. I even went to a Christian Bible college in England called Capernwray. It's part of the Torchbearers. So the Bible was my life. Christianity was my life. It was the perspective from which I saw the world. And growing up was hard because I was always fighting kind of within myself. There's a big difference between what the Bible says and what you are taught from the pulpit in a Sunday service or in a youth group or a Sunday school or whatever, or a college. Different denominations interpret the Bible in different ways. Some denominations just focus on certain things. Others are very different from each other. They can be very different from each other. And there's a lot of division between them and stuff. Whatever. What am I talking about? So I was very devoted to it, and I grew up in it. And Christianity was very real to me. My life revolved around it. So when I was in that emergency room, feeling completely alone, it kind of broke me. So what that experience showed me was all right, maybe I need to really look at my beliefs, look at Christianity, look at everything I've been taught, everything I believe, everything I've been told, and just really examine it, because that was weird and unexpected. Now I do believe. Now I'm not an atheist, but I'll never join another religion, because if I could be that into it for 30 years, be that devoted to it, that knowledgeable of it, and be wrong, and be convinced of it and the truth of it, and then be wrong and realize I was wrong about all that, then another religion was not going to be the answer. Because if my God wasn't real, then nobody else's gods were real either. As far as the main different religions have their own gods or whatever. So if mine wasn't true, then it's not a matter of I just happened to pick the wrong religion. It's that no religions are true. And I come to this sort of conclusion earlier in my life where I was like, if I wasn't a Christian, what would I be? And the answer was I would be a nihilist, because if there is no truth, no center for morality, then or anything like that. We're just making all this up and lying to ourselves and telling ourselves stories that we want to hear. So as soon as I started pulling on the threads of my belief system, it unraveled very quickly. I started with the historicity of the Bible, like going through the Bible with a historical perspective and being, all right, what actually happened? Like, did any of this stuff actually happen? Did none of it happen? Some of it, and as soon as you start doing that, because we're taught that the Bible is 100% true, that it's inspired by God, it's the Word of God, it's the message He's given us, and it's the truth of who we are, what we are, and what this world is that we live in. And if it can be proven that, let's say, in the Bible there are stories about the Israelites. You've heard the stories of like they're in Egypt, and then God comes to Moses, and all the plagues happen and everything like that, and then they get out and they go, and God says, I'm preparing a place for you. It's supposed to be in a new land, and you're my chosen people, and it's supposed to be like this kind of like a rhyme or a mirror or an echo of heaven itself, as in this world is not yours. This world is not your home. Your home is in heaven, and you go to heaven after you die, and God's preparing this wonderful place for you to go to. All you have to do is just power through this life, and you'll get to the end, and He'll take care of you. So we have all these stories of the Bible of like these ancient kings and judges, prophets, and great men of God, great women of God in the Bible. And these stories are supposed to inform us on how we should be, and it also informs us of who God is. But if these things never happened, if this is all just rhetorical, or like they're stories, that are made up for the sake of getting a truth across, like an allegory or something like that, but none of it actually happened, then we're in trouble. So I'll give you for instance. All right, so in the story of Exodus, the people of God are in the desert for 40 years. And at one point there were as many as 1 million of them. And they're in a small patch of desert, tundra, honestly. It's a pretty small area. And that area has been excavated by anthropologists and archaeologists, and they've looked for, because if there are that many people in a pretty small area, you basically got like a city or a country. And there should be tons of artifacts and stuff left behind by these people, but there just isn't. The place where the Bible says that these people were roaming in exile for 40 years, there's no evidence of it. That's one example. There just aren't that many there are nowhere near as many artifacts and landmarks and stuff like that should be there if there are that many people living there as a kind of a nomadic people. Even if there were like half that or 300,000 people in the desert, they'd leave all kinds of stuff behind, broken pottery, everything, and it's not there. And so what that does is it's an example of how, right, so the Bible is not a historical document then, so why not? Like, is God lying? Or are these just stories people are making up about themselves, about who they are and where they came from, so that they would have their own identity, and they wouldn't just be, wandering lost people in the desert, like no identity, nothing like that. They were real people, an established community of people, a society of people, and the stories they tell define who they are. And then if you look at the Bible itself, like the text and the history of the text and the problems with translations and mistranslations and stuff. So like I grew up reading the NIV, and I liked the King James Version as well, because it was so like kind of poetic, all these and thous and thines, this old way of speaking. And but I read the NIV because it was for clarity's sake. And if you can do a cursory search on the NIV Bible and problems with it, and you'll see there's a litany of it to the point where it's not recommended that anybody read. Trust that version, that translation. And therein lies the problem, really, is that there's so much confusion, there's so much division in the Christian church. There's, as evidenced by all the denominations, and there's all and they kind of are, denominations can be rivals with each other, to the point where certain denominations would claim that other denominations aren't really Christians at all. They're heretics. They don't believe in the same Jesus that we believe in, so they won't be going to heaven. They aren't real Christian. That's like a serious thing. That's a serious, and my thought is that like God could clear this up so easily. He gave us his word that's we've had for 2,000 years since Jesus was on the earth, and yet that's a long period of time. I mean, I know how much I've changed in my lifetime. Think about how much civilizations change over time. So of course you're going to have all this division, all these people saying, no, that's not what it means, this is what it means. And what you end up with are a bunch of denominations that are incompatible with each other. And my thought was, why can't God just clear things up for us? Why didn't he just send us a messenger, something like a prophet like they had in the Bible? Or have Jesus come make just like a stopover visit for a minute and just be like, hey, this is what I meant. It should be if God is all powerful, it should be very easy for him to correct our errors in understanding, correct the errors in our understanding of him and his word. But there's none of that. It's just silence. And when left alone, people start coming up with their own ideas about things, which is exactly what's happened. So I remember the night that I finally accepted the fact that God wasn't there, that Jesus wasn't there, that I had spent 30 years of my life devoted to this religion, and I cried. I cried hard. I don't know if I've ever cried that hard. And what I felt was just completely alone. I felt like this person, this God, my Savior, my Lord, my friend, this person who I had been praying to, asking for help, I've been praising and worshiping, I've been pleading for him to make me a better person, to make me stronger, make me more, and wanting to know what his will for my life was, because he had a plan for me, and that plan was so obscure, I didn't know what it was, and I wanted to know so badly. And I spent so much time chasing after that and praying about that. And all this time I spent exerting all this energy, time, everything into. It was just a one-way thing. It's like talking into a radio and there's no receiver. There's no one there. I've been praying and crying and laughing and enjoying life and sending all this gratitude to a void, to nothing. I felt completely alone. And after that, I defaulted to what I had decided earlier in life was the only rational default. That if religion wasn't real, then nothing is, So I became a nihilist for 2 years. I wore out my copy of Sisyphus and made peace with the idea that this is all there is. And so I started to enjoy my life. And I started being very deliberate. Like I'd go to, in Portland, there's this bar called Dots in southeast Portland, and I'd go there and I'd order really nice mixed drinks and stuff. I wouldn't get drunk or anything, but I would just enjoy these drinks, and I'd have my ears wide open listening to all these other people there, and looking without being a weirdo. Just enjoying the company of other people and enjoying my friends and doing things I enjoy doing, like writing music and stuff like that. But it was sort of like you're on board this doomed ship, you know, that would lead to nothing. But I found a way to make my peace with that. And so I did that for 2 years. And then I discovered psychedelic mushrooms and DMT. So I've been a DJ at raves. I helped throw raves. I was a rave DJ for 12 years in Portland. But I never really got into the drug culture of the whole thing. I mean, I've tried a little bit of pretty much everything, but I never really got into anything. I was pretty sober, even alcohol. Like I was just a pretty sober person. Part of that, the main reason for that was that I was a manager of a rave company, and somebody had to be sober for if and when the cops showed up to shut us down, because we were throwing a lot of renegades and stuff like that. And somebody had to be sober for that. Somebody had to be sober, like in case something happens to somebody and they need help. And so that was I had personally chosen to be that guy who could make sound decisions, you know, and wasn't lost somewhere. But someone gave me and my girlfriend at the time some DMT. I was like, just try this, you know. They just gifted it to us, and we tried it, and it blew my mind, because here's the thing, like, after I had my first 1 or 2 experiences with DMT, I was like, wow, that was the most powerful hallucination I've ever experienced, you know. But then I went online, and I went to like Arrowhead and stuff, like these websites where people would post, like forums where people would post their experiences on different substances, entheogens, you know, and they were describing the same things that I had seen when I was on DMT, blasted off like on the astral plane somewhere or something, whatever that was. They're describing the same things that I saw, and meeting the same kind of entities, and going to the same places, and the same sort of experiences that I had. And it was like, oh my gosh, wait, no, that was real. And so, and I had been having like doing like psychedelic mushrooms and stuff for a couple of months before that DMT experience. And the mushrooms had sort of opened me up a little bit, because I was still in this place where I had this experience on mushrooms where I saw myself as a dog sitting on a hill, looking up at the sky, at the stars, and looking up at the stars the way a dog looks up at his human for approval, direction, to read whatever the humans think, because he's there with you. And that was like me and God. I was the dog on the hill looking up at God, and he wasn't there. And as a dog sitting on a hill, my heart sank. Like, you know, if you've been around dogs, you know what they're like when their heart sinks, when they're disappointed, or they've been left out. And I remember like bowing my head and just being like saddened that I was alone. Because a dog needs a human, like a sword needs a sheath. Certain dogs, good dogs, anyway. So being crestfallen like that, but then like feeling this will growing inside myself, and looking back up at the stars in defiance of the absence of God, looking up still in defiance of that, and saying, no, I'm not going to give up. I don't know how I know, and I know I've gotten it wrong throughout my life, but I know for certain there's something there. It may not be, I mean, it's obviously not the Christian God or anything like that, but there's something. I know there. And that was what mushrooms taught me. They opened me up to that. I could not have gotten there without them. And then with DMT, it's like when you're on mushrooms, you see the shimmer of the spiritual world. I don't know what to call it. I used to call it hyper reality, or a whole of reality, as is with both corporeal and non-corporeal forms and places. It'd be like heaven and earth, you know, like the whole of heaven and earth, basically. You see sort of the shimmer of that when you're on when you eat mushrooms. And then, but with DMT, you go through the shimmer and into that world, that supernatural, spiritual world. And at this point, like, I'll never join another religion, and I am very, very careful on what it is that I will that I will commit to believe in, because I have the experience of 30 years of wasting my time believing in something that wasn't true and being so wrong about things. I don't want to make that mistake again. So my beliefs at this point are few and very minimal. And I believe that there is some kind of supernatural realm out there. I believe that we do continue on after these bodies die. And what that is, I don't know. Who's in charge? I have no idea. I like looking into, like, I really enjoy reading esoteric literature. I enjoy reading about Gnosticism. These people who kind of have similar experiences of coming in contact with something beyond themselves and try to rationalize it and try to make sense of it, which is impossible because it's totally different from anything on this planet. Anything we've experienced, it's very different. And but I believe that it's there. And so what's the point of my life then? What's my response to that knowledge? My response is to be the best person, to leave this world the best version of me that I could possibly be. Not just a better person than I once was, because we're always constantly changing, failing, winning, losing, everything. But just to be the best, to leave this world a very, very stable, steady, and aligned with good that I can be. That's a terrible sentence. And so, like, in spiritual practices now, mostly what I do is it's like in my own head, and like it's just I do my best to align myself with the things that I know are good and right, and maybe that good and evil don't exist in that world. I don't know, but I want to be aligned with the ethics of Mr. Rogers. It's as simple as that. And so now, like, I have my own, like, I tried different practices. I've tried chaos magic. I've tried different rituals. I've read different things. And it's sort of playing around, honestly. And there's no danger in that at all. You can fool around with stuff if you want. Just don't take it too seriously, And what I've found, I don't really know how to, there's no way to prove this, but for myself, what I've found is that when you do that, when you try to lie to yourself with something, or you call out, there is a response. There is some kind of response. There's something there listening. So that's sort of like an emotional roller coaster for me, but that's sort of the story of a general, like, full of Swiss cheese holes story of my life timeline. But I just need to start somewhere, and this is where I'm starting. So thank you for listening.